Thank you. So this is really weird to pretend like I'm somebody else. But I own a psychiatric practice in Salem, New Hampshire, and that's how I know Janet, from the work she's doing in the state. So good evening, I'm Executive Councilor Janet Stevens. I have the honor of serving as your Executive Councilor, representing Brentwood and 31 other municipalities. I represent 266,000 constituents who I am fiercely protective of. The Executive Council provides oversight of New Hampshire State Treasury and essentially serves as the Board of Directors for the state of New Hampshire, with an emphasis on financial responsibility. The Executive Council is responsible for vetting and approving judicial and executive branch nominees. I have approved 45 judges and justices to serve within the Circuit, Superior, and State Supreme Courts since elected. I also serve on the Governor's Advisory Commission on Intermodal Transportation and oversee 65 road, bridge, port projects fully funded at $717 million, including $24 million for major roadway safety improvements on Route 125. However, the real job is to serve you, my constituents, and the citizens of New Hampshire. I am proud of my record of service to my constituents and all of New Hampshire residents. I successfully delivered the following: $6.2 million, which supported 52 Brentwood entities during the pandemic. $472,000 in local fiscal relief funds for Brentwood. $150 million to stabilize childcare. I worked closely with a Brentwood childcare provider when reimbursements were stalled. I was the sole executive councilor to consistently support the $100 million in Invest New Hampshire Workforce Housing Program. My advocacy has secured an additional 244 units of workforce housing in Exeter, and statewide 3,000 units of workforce housing will be added. I have secured over $100 million for clean water initiatives throughout my district. I have expanded access to health care for everyone. For example, I advocated for increasing funding for women's health care. My district recently received $3 million for women's health care, while provider services also increased to the highest in the state. I fought for the expansion of behavioral health care treatment, and since elected, I have advocated and approved $107 million to expand access for inpatient care. I took on one of our nation's largest healthcare insurers, Anthem, when they failed to properly provide Medicare Advantage services to 11,000 state retirees. They complied. Exeter Hospital. I am the only elected official fighting to sustain the Advanced Life Support Program and 7 critical healthcare programs. I am fighting for 50,000 residents. I am extremely proud of my financial oversight. At the recent Executive Council meeting, I raised concerns about the lack of information on the Commission managing the state's $500 million in deferred compensation investments. Notably, the committee hadn't filed financials or annual reports since 2018. I am pleased to announce it is now being overhauled. I am a fiscal conservative. I pledged in 2016 to oppose the sales or income tax, and I stand firm. My opponent has voted 3 times for an income tax, backed a $100 million property tax increase, and supported $185 million in business taxes over 5 years. In closing, I believe a true leader is defined by how they respond in a crisis. When a resident tragically lost their life at the intersection of Route 125 and South in 2022, Brentwood residents approached me for help. I promised to make improvements at the intersection a top priority, and I went straight to work. Conducted multiple site walks with New Hampshire DOT and residents, held a Brentwood community forum to gather residents' input. Within 96 hours of the forum, the New Hampshire Department of Safety and Office of Highway Safety approved my request for a law enforcement roadway saturation, which lasted 2 months. Conducted a road safety audit with residents, New Hampshire DOT, and law enforcement. When the project faced delays, I intervened to keep it on track. The intersection was improved this summer. Meanwhile, my opponent, your selectman, was nowhere to be found. He was missing in action throughout this process. Since 2023, he has missed or called in for 33% of Brentwood Select Board meetings. This is not the way to lead. Honorable Janet Stevens.
So that concludes our opening statements. I want to thank all the candidates for giving your statements. I think there's like 2 or 3 things I want to talk to each of you about that have absolutely nothing to do with politics. So it's been nice to get to know you. With that being said, we can open up to questions and answers. If you have a question, you can approach the mic or speak loudly from your seat. Yes?
I have a question for Alan. I read something recently concerning your representation of Brentwood the last time you served in the House. And I read that you were absent, had 52 unexcused absences. Is that true?
That is not true.
Al, do you have the microphone?
I'm sorry, that is not true. I did not have 52 absences. I was there for a large majority of the time. I did have some absences like every other representative, but I was not absent 52 times. I don't know where that comes from. I'm sorry, it's simply not true.
No, it was in the local paper.
Yeah, well, that's too bad. You know, local papers don't always print truth. We know that. So. Yeah, she was just saying you could, if I wasn't there for like voting, she was talking about there could be roll calls for voting where you don't vote or whatever, that kind of thing. But I did not miss 52 days. Oh my gosh, that's huge.
Next question.
Yeah, I don't need the microphone, I'm pretty loud. My question, following along this same line, my question is for John Morgan. Having been a selectman for the last several years, you have missed lots of select board meetings, and I was gonna ask you how you, I like the way you explained the 3 Cs for the executive
Liz Faria,
council.
if you take the 3 Cs out of here, we're gonna have a party, because that is, we know that it's catching on.
Okay, I would like to know how you propose to do the select board, which you haven't been
Yeah.
at for a lot, and how you would propose to be also an executive counselor.
100%, and thank you for asking. Look, I mean, here is the reality. What you just heard, my opponent's representative, first of all, I really wish my opponent would show up to one of these forums, because we have had, I don't know, 7 of 8 of them, and she missed one in her hometown of Rye, she missed one in Portsmouth, she missed one in Pelham, and she's missing one in Brentwood. I mean, it's a little demoralizing because she's my executive counselor too, and I think that she has to show up and answer some of these tough questions. I don't know why she's running from her record. But Liz, thank you for asking that question. Look, you all know that I am 42 years old. My father was a public school superintendent. My mother is a public school teacher. Katie is a PA, and I am not independently wealthy. I'm not. I really wish I was. I really, really wish that I had, you know, some fancy beach house on the water. I don't. But I do have to work, and my job takes me away sometimes. I don't care, Liz, if it is 3 o'clock in the morning on the other side of the planet. You have seen my face on that screen every time because I love this town and I love this job, and I will fight every moment of every day to advance progress in the town of Brentwood. Like, when Dad was on his deathbed 7.5 years ago, we didn't have 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week fire and EMS coverage. We didn't have it. We called 911, and Dad's sitting there holding my hand, and nothing happens. That was 7.5 years ago. In the last 3.5 years, we have added police to our streets. Fire and EMS coverage is 24/7. We even announced yesterday that Brentwood is likely going to house the replacement for the ALS, the loss of the ALS program. I am so proud of this town and the work that I've been doing. And just like when I was in the state senate and I had 100% rate of attendance, it's going to do the same thing here on the executive council. But thank you for the question. I really appreciate it.
Yes.
I have a question for everybody, staccato-like question requiring staccato-like answers. Maybe from left to right, right to left. In a first world country such as ours, we have a pretty kind of sort of stable government. So what I'd like to know from everybody up here is this form of government in the United States of America a democracy or a constitutional republic? Thank you.
It's a constitutional republic, that's the way it was founded.
Constitutional republic.
What they said.
I'd say right now, 6 days before the election, it's a nightmare.
I'm with Tom.
It's a constitutional republic.
Next question. Yes.
There was a state bill last year to help address the housing crisis, but it would have mandated certain requirements for accessory dwelling units, which would override local planning. And I'd just like to hear how different folks feel about that, and if there are alternatives to maybe help incentivize some more workforce housing without telling local governments what to do.
I'll take it.
Sure. I don't know how long that cord is, so we can pass it around to a certain extent.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and many of you might have read, I write a thing in the Brentwood newsletter once a month, and I did address the issue, that bill and a number of other bills. These are bills where I actually ended up breaking with my party. There's mostly people from my side that had sponsored some of those, but I think the issue of local control, particularly over zoning, is very important. And when you see the word shall in a bill from Concord, it means towns will not have any choice. This will happen and you will not have say over it. We've had all sorts of issues here in Brentwood around what it means to be a rural community, what it means to preserve our rural character. And so I did not support those bills, not because we don't have a housing crisis, but because that bill, I think the one that you're talking about in particular, would have allowed essentially every piece of property that meets the setbacks from to essentially build second or more homes on them, or detached accessory dwelling units. There was another one that proposed to allow 4 units on any place that was served by public water and sewer, which is not our town, but again, I talked to my fellow legislators from towns that have that, and they said, we don't have the capacity. If you pass this bill, all of our systems are going to be obsolete tomorrow. So yeah, it's a complicated issue. I do agree with the idea of incentivizing towns to move in this direction. There's going to be a glut of commercial space in this state, and there's going to be an ongoing shortage of residential space. I'd like to see us try and find ways to incentivize, even at the individual organizational level, to move in that direction.
Does anyone else want to be heard on that?
I've heard you. Speaker right now.
Thank you. I'm assuming the bill that you're discussing is the 2 additional, the 2 ADUs on the property, right? And I think one of the concerns with that was, yes, it was usurping local control, but that would be any property around here. Anyone could put 1 or 2 additional units on their property. For many of us, our home is our biggest asset, and we could potentially see our property values plummet. We could overwhelm the school system. For me personally, if the housing is I'm going to be honest with you, because I always will. It's not my wheelhouse. So what I would do is I would come to the planning board. So if a bill came before me, I would say to you, what do you think? Because I think absolutely every single town and community is unique, right? We each bring something different to the table. What I would do is I would also meet with, full disclosure, I would meet with Fremont and Danville's planning board to find out where the majority stands and what is best. In my limited knowledge, my understanding is one thing that is a big issue is that there's a big issue as far as getting the permits done and through. Apparently they stall and they take months, and we need to make that process a little bit quicker. This is what, when I've tried to read up on this is what my understanding is, but most definitely I would come to you and I would want to learn from your board what's best.
Do any of the other candidates want to be heard on this issue? Okay, next question.
Melissa, you mentioned school vouchers and that they save money. Would you explain how that happens?
I'm so glad you asked. Yeah, can I just, one second. I tried to write big enough so I didn't move my leaders, but. Thank Thank you. Okay, so with the educational freedom accounts, right, state will typically give $4,100 per student, okay? Potentially $2,100 if they're receiving aid for special education, which is a total of possibly $6,200 per student, okay? In order to qualify, you need to be within 350% of the 2024 federal poverty level. Now, this is where it actually gets interesting. So because these children are not in the public school system, right, we are not paying for them like we would any other student. So the average cost per student, I believe in New Hampshire is, so here I have 17,456. So this is interesting because Utah, Idaho, Arizona, Nevada, Oklahoma, they can educate their students between $8,000 and $9,000 each. We're at 17,000, Mass 19,000, this is average. Highest was New Jersey, Vermont, Connecticut at 21K per student. So what's happening now is with the vouchers, we are giving each of these students only $4,100 versus if they were in our public school system, they would cost the taxpayer approximately $20,000 per student.
But taking them out of the school, the public school system, doesn't automatically reduce the expenses for the public school system by that $17,000 or $18,000. A large degree of the school expenses are fixed expenses. Not all of them, but a large percentage of them.
Some of them are, yes, but if those students were to attend a private school or to be homeschooled, you would not be receiving that money anyway. And as it stands right now with the Education Freedom Account, we are still giving the public schools money for another 1.5 years after that child is left. Quite honestly, the public schools are benefiting from the EFA program at this point in time.
Seems like some other people want to be heard on this issue. I think Brenda asked first, but I don't think my microphone will reach you, so do you want to move towards me?
That's an overly simplistic explanation. First of all, we still have to pay for our public schools. We still have to pay for those same teachers, for the classrooms, for everything entailed with education. I feel like it's double taxation. It's also our public tax money going to education where we have absolutely no oversight or accountability for what's taught, who they're going to exclude in the classroom. Public money should be spent on public institutions to benefit the public good. It's also a veiled attempt, it's a national attempt to, as was mentioned before, to privatize schools. Great public schools are what make for good communities and desirable property values. This is a really scary thought to dismantle our public education. Another thought on this is that this public money, I live in a border town, Southampton. Some kids go to private schools out of state. So that means $4,000 is headed over to Governor Academy in Byfield or Phillips Academy in Andover. If you've ever driven around those campuses, they have more money than God. And your taxpayer money and my taxpayer money should not be going to further enrich a school, to pay for a teacher that's going to be working down in Andover, Mass, who's going to be living maybe in the Andover, Mass, and eating in restaurants down there. So our public money should stay here in state, and I am staunchly opposed to these voucher programs. Furthermore, this was initially slipped into the state budget. The testimony against the school vouchers was 3-1 against them. So they knew that they couldn't pass this bill, so they slipped it into the budget. Most people weren't in favor of it. When it was initially proposed, they suggested that it was for people who really couldn't afford private education and weren't doing too well in the public schools, so it would give them an option. Well, 70% of those taking advantage of this program were already in private schools. So they were paying for it on their own anyway. And some of that money is now going to religious schools. That's against our state constitution, separation of church and state. That's a state mandate, it's a federal mandate, it's how our country was founded, and it's just wrong. I don't think I've left too much out, but anybody want to add to that?
Because the question was directed at Melissa, I want to give her a chance to say something if she wants to in response to Brenda.
I don't want to get into, I just want to simply put it, the money is following the students. Their parents pay taxes as well. We're not paying for governors to be beautiful. We're not paying for their campus to be beautiful. We're paying for our children to be educated. That's all it comes down to.
I got the speaker. Yeah, I think a lot of what Brenda brought up is really the case. It's supposed to be about educational freedom, but the vast majority, I think it might even be higher than the statistic that Brenda quoted, are students that were already in home schools or religious schools or private schools. So those are funds that are just directly leaving the school that otherwise would have been in our district. You know, I'll say I moved here because of the public school system. Our kids went through Swayze, but when they got to high school, they both ended up going to the Phillips Exeter Academy. You know, that was a choice that we made, and we knew that we were making that choice. You know, people have options even there. It's a need-blind school. There's ways for people to attend private schools, and homeschooling, I don't know why there's the need to provide extensive funding for that. So the only other thing I'll say, and the reason I got it, because Brenda said a lot of this is I also think school is the last thing that we have that unifies people in our communities. You know, all the kids go, or most of the kids go, some of them go to charter schools if they have special needs, but we don't need a system that basically fragments our education system and has everyone able to sort of take their ball and go home, because there's just no common space anymore for people to get together and be in one place. It's great to see a room like this where we're doing it for one night, but it just doesn't happen.
So you heard the 70% statistic already. 70%, 72% of the students who receive the voucher scheme vouchers were already going to homeschool, private school, etc. The 350% of the poverty cap that Melissa mentioned is accurate. Two things I just want to highlight on that front that I think are really important to understand is you do have to qualify once. So if your kid, when you are younger, is going to kindergarten, you only have to qualify for that once. There's no further accountability all the way through the end of high school. So you qualify once, you're in the program, you get that check automatically. The other piece, in terms of fiscal responsibility, I think is really, really important to understand. The Department of Education, the Commissioner of Education, really, has been blocking an audit of this program since it started. So there is absolutely zero visibility into where this money is going, how it is being spent, and the third-party programs that are deeply involved and entrenched in this voucher scheme. So just wanted to highlight a couple of those additional pieces.
Thank you.
So I'm going to leave it alone after this because clearly I understand that you all don't agree with the program. I understand that and I appreciate that. I do want to throw out there a couple of things, and that is, yes, some of the homeschooling families have taken advantage of this, but these particular families, for whatever reason, the public schools were not providing what that child needed. And there are expenses involved with homeschooling, whether it be the computer, it be the textbooks. And I want to take it a step further and say that there is something called the digital wallet, and that is what the parents are using. Our Children's Scholarship Fund actually oversees the entire program. It is a strict program. They do audit it from within, and if you were to mismanage the funds, you would go to jail, you would be prosecuted. Also, there is a marketplace of pre-approved online vendors that these people must use, and they're very strict. They have rules about, I don't know, let's say you're homeschooling, but you're really into farm animals, you can't use it toward farm animals. can't use it toward broadband for the entire family, computer for the entire family. They are very strict about this. They are monitored. I just want to bring it back to, it's our children that we're supporting. Thank you.
Yes.
I want to talk about the fact that I don't know how you're going to address a parent like myself who actually sent one of my children to a public school, and the public school actually told me that they could not accommodate my child and recommended that I take my child out of the public school. And what you're saying to me is that I don't have the right to figure out how some of my tax dollars I can then figure out how to educate my child in an alternative way. Secondly, not all children fit into a public school. And so we have to think of ways to support children and what they need and work with parents to figure out what's best for that child, not what's best for an overall school, because you all have decided that public school is the only way to educate a child. I think that is selfish and narrow-minded, and certainly not the way that I would think that as a society we want to take the rights away from parents rather than supporting parents in their ability to figure out how to best support and educate their child in a way that works for their child, not just because a particular community has decided it's this way or the highway.
I don't know what the specific needs of your child were, but certainly I know that in our public schools before these freedom accounts were initiated, if a child had special needs, I know children from Southampton were sent to other schools and places of learning to accommodate their needs, and that we have a legal obligation to do so. So that existed before the freedom accounts. And our own daughter at one point in time was having some problems in our public school, and we went through the proper channels, and there was an effort made to send her to another school as well that would have better served her needs. So these are avenues that were in existence before the freedom accounts.
But not all things fit into a legal context. And so there are some issues that fit a legal context, and that child will be able to be eligible for services from the system, and some things are far more grayer and far more nuanced that a child doesn't fit into a public system. And that's why there's the beauty of homeschooling, private schooling, a combination. And I believe that, I thought we lived in the live free or die state. So to me, we should be figuring out how to support families individually and helping them figure out what best suits that child for that particular circumstance. And it may be fluid. It may be that at one point it's homeschooling, maybe another point it's private schooling, perhaps at another point it's public schooling. But some of those tax dollars should follow a student all the way through in a way that that family has decided works best for them, rather than a community deciding that it's this way or no way. And that, I feel very strongly about that.
I appreciate that input, and I think that there still would be avenues within the community and within the individual school that those kinds of options existed before these freedom accounts. But that's because my children went through the public school system, and I was aware of children who were accommodated, but that's my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to put on my school board hat with the 15 years of experience, and my parent hat, and I can see exactly what you both are saying. I just want to go back to the cost and the cost savings, which is where we originally started with this discussion. You're absolutely right. Still, we will send a child out of district easily 6 figures, 100,000, 200,000 per year for that student. Who bears the burden of that? The local property tax people. So if someone from Brentwood is sent out of district, we could be easily looking at 125,000, 200,000 a year to support that child, and we're all going to pay for it, right? And if we haven't budgeted for that, hopefully we have it in our emergency fund, right? But if we don't, the school budget could be frozen for the year. They could have an emergency meeting. They could come back to us. We need more money. Or even that March at the regular school district meeting, they will come to us and say, we need to raise our budget by such and such, because let's say, for example, that child's in first grade, I'll say. Swayze goes to fifth grade. Well, every year for the next 4 years, we're gonna have to budget an extra couple $100,000 for that child. If it's 3 children, it's another $600,000. That's a lot when you're looking at a $5 or $6 million budget. We go back to the EFAs. With the EFA, we are giving the parents $4,100 per child, possibly $6,200 in total money. That's the total amount we're giving them compared to possible 6 figures. Thank
Are
you.
you comparing a special needs child with an EFA? Because there's no comparison there. You're
So
suggesting,
I don't
you're,
want direct back and forth between you
Okay.
guys. You can go through me. I'm gonna call the next question. I think Liz had her hand up next.
So I was also on the school board in Brentwood and Exeter for 10 years, a little bit before Melissa, a little overlapping. But the thing, and I'm not advocating for the education funding or not, but at the co-op level, which is the middle and the high school that we send our kids to, that is going to probably be $70 million this year, 70 million. And almost nobody from town comes to that vote where we could make it less. 70 million, and they've lost, in the last 10 years, 800 children. So it should be going down. It shouldn't be going up. So the public school is doing something wrong, and I'm so glad that my kids are long out of the public school, because like many, I moved here also for the schools. I dare say some of us would not be moving here for the schools, and I know people that are moving away because of the schools now. We need to do something, and we need to control costs. And this, maybe some more competition is a better way to go. I don't know, but $70 million for that middle and high school is ridiculous.
The 100,000, 150,000 figure for the figure reciting, we had at least one child in the Brentwood School District who was of that situation. We didn't have to pay that kind of money. But that was, as Brenda says, a special needs student. And I don't know what those needs were. I'm assuming they were medical, whatever, not just someone who wasn't being accommodated in the school system. So I think you need to get apples and apples and give us some examples of people who didn't have special needs, because we're stuck with that. And the home charter schools or these other, the $6,000 kids, price kids are totally different than those other special needs kids. And I think you know that because you've been in the system.
And then, so I was blessed to serve on the education committee at the State House. And actually, quite a few of the students that took advantage of the EFA program were special needs students, where their parents did not want them to be part of the public school system.
I had the same kind of clarifying question, because it sounded like if you have a student with special needs, that those costs might be really high, and you're saying the voucher, now we would only give them $4,100, which doesn't seem like enough money to pay for that, to meet those needs. But my other question was about, the school budget. My understanding is that part of the reason it's going up in terms of a bill to us is that we're getting less money from the state. And we're getting less money from the state because A, it's not meeting its obligations to begin with, and then B, taxes were cut for higher earners, and we have to, as a local community, make up the difference. So I'd just like to understand that better. And I heard people say I won't vote for taxes, or I'll cut taxes, but at the end of the day, aren't we paying more at the local level anyways? And I'm worried about my property taxes.
Do you want everyone to answer that, or anyone? Okay, everyone, anyone. Who wants it?
Solve the problem.
Okay, John.
I'll be very brief on this. So, we got a letter from the state at the select board level, and they're not going to plow Middle Road this year because of another downshifting cost, right? I mean, this happens over and over and over again. It's really frustrating, especially for all of us, because we have to foot the bill for this. When I was in the state senate, we had the 6th lowest business tax environment in the entire country. And the administration, the legislators, and the majority now, well, they lowered the business profits tax and business enterprise tax. I don't want to get too wonky, but basically everyone pays business enterprise tax, very small tax, but including our small businesses. The thing that's frustrating to me, though, is that we're further cutting taxes for these giant behemoth corporations who are making record profits, and mostly headquartered out of state, Comcast and Walmart. So we're lowering the amount of revenue that we're taking in. The state already doesn't take in very much revenue. And here's the problem with that. It's just a math problem. It's 2 + 2, right? If you don't take in enough money from the state and bring it down to the towns and municipalities, well, who has to foot the bill for things like plowing a middle road now, a state road? Well, we do. And it's kind of insignificant at the end of the day, but it's these little costs, more in pensions, more in healthcare, more in plowing. It's these little costs that really start to add up. And you all have to foot the bill because and in terms of education, we have been funding education unconstitutionally for the last couple of decades in the state of New Hampshire. In terms of the voucher scheme, again, the $4,100, $4,500, the problem is our public schools are mandated to educate all students. But those private schools, if you cut them a voucher, they're not mandated to take special needs kids. So you're absolutely right, Kristen. I mean, that's not nearly enough money to take a special needs kid, but that's kind of the point of what this voucher scheme is all about. It's not about making sure everyone can get a good education.
I do want to say, first of all, $4,100 is not going to cover